October 15th, 1943. A late autumn morning at Gary Works, Indiana. The world's largest steel mill sprawled across 9,000 acres along Lake Michigan's southern shore, its blast furnaces glowing orange against the grey sky. A convoy of military trucks rolled through the main gates, carrying 50 German prisoners of war from Camp Atterbury. These were veterans of the Africa Corps, captured in Tunisia 6 months earlier. Men who had been taught that American industry was weak, inefficient, primitive compared to German engineering excellence. What they were about to witness in the next 8 hours would fundamentally alter their understanding of the war, of America, and of the mathematical certainty of German defeat. The Geneva Convention prohibited using prisoners of war for direct military production. They could not build tanks, manufacture ammunition, or forge armor plate. But American industry faced an acute crisis. Millions of workers had joined the armed forces or moved to weapons factories. Steel mills needed laborers for auxiliary work, maintenance tasks, general plant operations. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Work that kept the mills running but did not directly produce weapons of war. So German prisoners found themselves assigned to American steel mills, to factories, to the vast industrial complexes that formed the economic engine of Allied victory. The irony was profound. Enemies of America would witness firsthand the industrial capacity that made their defeat inevitable. They would see not propaganda, not exaggeration, but raw material reality. Tons of molten steel, assembly lines running continuously, production volumes that exceeded anything in Germany. At 7:30 that morning, Sergeant Hans Richter stepped down from the truck bed and stared at the Gary Works complex stretching before him. He was 32 years old, a professional soldier, a veteran of the French campaign and 2 years in North Africa. He had seen German industry, visited the Krupp works in Essen, toured tank production facilities. He considered himself knowledgeable about modern manufacturing, yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for the sheer physical scale of what lay before him. The mill complex extended further than he could see. Blast furnaces towered 100 feet high, their tops obscured by steam and smoke. Railroad tracks crisscrossed the grounds in bewildering complexity, trains moving constantly, delivering raw materials, carrying away finished steel. Buildings the size of cathedrals housed rolling mills, finishing operations, processing facilities. The noise was overwhelming. The clang of metal on metal, the roar of furnaces, the shriek of machinery operating at sustained high intensity. And everywhere, the casual abundance that characterized American industry. Piles of iron ore rose like small mountains. Coal stockpiles stretched for acres. Limestone for flux was heaped in quantities that would have supplied a German mill for months. The raw materials alone, just the feedstock sitting in storage, exceeded the entire monthly allocation for some German industrial complexes. The prisoners were assigned to the maintenance department under the supervision of American foremen who spoke minimal German. Their tasks were mundane but essential: clearing debris from rail lines, moving equipment, assisting with routine repairs, loading scrap metal. Simple labor that required no specialized skills, but kept them moving throughout the complex, observing, witnessing, calculating. By mid-morning, Sergeant Richter found himself near Blast Furnace No. 7, one of 6 massive furnaces operating at the Gary Works. An American foreman, a thick-set man in his 50s named Edward Sullivan, was explaining through hand gestures and broken German what needed to be done. But Richter was barely listening. His attention was fixed on the industrial process unfolding before him. Every few hours, the blast furnace tapped. 100 tons of molten iron poured into a massive ladle, white-hot metal flowing like water, casting shadows that danced across the work floor. The heat was intense, even at 50 feet. Richter watched as the filled ladle, suspended from an overhead crane, travelled to the open hearth furnaces where iron would be converted to steel. The process repeated continuously, methodically, with practiced efficiency. Richter was doing mental calculations. 200 tons per tap, multiple taps per day from each furnace, 6 blast furnaces operating simultaneously. The daily iron production from this single facility exceeded what he had seen coming from entire German industrial regions, and this was just the Gary Works. Just one American steel mill among dozens scattered across the industrial Midwest. During the lunch break, the prisoners ate in a cafeteria near the mill. The food was standard American working man's fare: beef sandwiches, fresh vegetables, coffee, fruit, more food than German. Soldiers on the Eastern Front received, better quality than civilians in Germany had seen in years. But what struck Richter was not the meal itself, but what he overheard American workers discussing. They were complaining about overtime requirements, about production targets, about management decisions. One steel worker was angry that he had to work 6 consecutive days. Another grumbled about safety inspections slowing down production. These men were living in abundance compared to anyone in Germany, yet they considered their working conditions a hardship worth complaining about. The disconnect was stunning. After lunch, the prisoners were moved to the finishing mills. Here, Richter witnessed something that challenged everything he understood about German industrial superiority. A continuous hot strip mill, recently installed, was producing steel sheet at rates that seemed impossible. The mill could roll out 1,500 feet of steel sheet per minute. Richter watched in fascination as glowing steel billets entered one end of the massive machinery and emerged as finished sheet steel, rolled to precise thickness, cut to exact lengths, stacked for shipment. The precision was remarkable, but more remarkable was the speed, and more remarkable still was the casual nature of the entire operation. American workers monitored gauges, made adjustments, kept the process running smoothly. But there was none of the frantic intensity he associated with German war production. This was routine operation, normal industrial procedure, sustainable production maintained month after month without exhausting men or machines. An older prisoner, Friedrich Müller, had been a mechanical engineer at a steel plant in the Ruhr Valley before the war. He stood beside Richter, watching the continuous strip mill operate. His face had gone pale. He muttered calculations under his breath, checking figures repeatedly as if hoping to find an error that would make the numbers less. Catastrophic. "It's not possible," Müller said quietly in German. "The tonnage output exceeds theoretical maximums. The material handling systems alone require capacity we don't have in Germany, and this is routine operation, not some special demonstration." Richter asked the obvious question. How did American production compare to German output? Müller was silent for a long moment, watching steel sheet emerge from the mill in an endless ribbon of industrial capacity. "There is no comparison," Müller finally replied. "This single mill complex produces more steel in a month than all the mills in Essen produce in 3 months, perhaps 4, and the Americans have dozens of facilities like this." Throughout the afternoon, the prisoners moved through different sections of the complex. They saw the oxygen furnace operations where pig iron became steel. They observed the ingot pouring, molten steel cast into massive forms for further processing. They watched as finished steel products, plates and beams and sheets and rods, were loaded onto railroad cars for shipment to automotive factories, shipyards, aircraft plants, construction sites. The railroad operations alone were staggering. Gary Works had its own internal railway system, more than 200 miles of track within the complex, connecting different operations, moving materials efficiently. The rail yard could accommodate 15,000 freight cars simultaneously. In the time the prisoners spent at the facility, they watched dozens of trains arrive with raw materials and depart with finished products. The logistics of moving material through the complex exceeded the transportation capacity of many European nations. As the afternoon wore on, Sergeant Richter found himself analyzing what he was witnessing through the lens of military strategy. He had served on Rommel's staff in North Africa, understood logistics, grasped the relationship between industrial capacity and battlefield success. The implications of American steel production were clear and undeniable. Every tank required 18 tons of steel. Every ship needed hundreds or thousands of tons depending on size. Aircraft consumed steel for engines and frameworks. Artillery pieces, trucks, jeeps, all required steel. Ammunition, from rifle bullets to battleship shells, depended on steel casings. The entire material foundation of modern warfare rested on steel production, and America was producing steel at volumes Germany could never match. Even if every German mill operated at maximum theoretical capacity, even if slave labor and extended shifts pushed output to unsustainable levels, Germany would still be outproduced by factors of 3 to 1 or higher. The mathematics were inescapable. America could build more weapons, more vehicles, more ships, more aircraft than Germany could destroy. Material superiority would eventually overwhelm tactical excellence. Near the end of the shift, an incident occurred that crystallized the industrial disparity into vivid clarity. A small fire broke out in one of the maintenance buildings. Nothing serious, but enough to trigger the mill's fire suppression systems. Water poured from overhead sprinklers, electric pumps activated, fire crews responded within minutes. The fire was extinguished in less than 10 minutes, barely interrupting operations. What caught Richter's attention was the casual response. American workers treated the incident as routine, an inconvenience requiring standard procedures. The mill's safety systems operated automatically. Equipment responded as designed, trained personnel executed, practiced protocols. There was no panic, no disruption to overall operations. The mill continued running at full capacity throughout the incident. In Germany, such a fire would have been a crisis. Fire suppression equipment was limited. Water supplies were constrained by electrical power restrictions. Trained personnel were in short supply as men were conscripted for. Military service. A fire that American workers dismissed as routine would have shut down German operations for hours or days. The contrast revealed not just differences in specific equipment, but fundamental disparities in infrastructure, resources, training, and organizational capacity. By 5 o'clock, the prisoners were loaded back onto trucks for the return journey to Camp Atterbury. As the convoy pulled away from Gary Works, Richter looked back at the complex. The blast furnaces still glowed, the mills still operated, trains still moved through the yards. The facility would run through the night, through the weekend, continuously producing steel without pause. 3 shifts of workers, 8 hours each, maintaining output 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. And this was October 1943. The war would continue for another 19 months. During that time, Gary Works alone would produce millions of tons of steel. Multiply that by the dozens of other American steel mills. Factor in the steel production from Britain and the Soviet Union, compare it to Germany's constrained and declining output, and the mathematical certainty of German defeat became undeniable. That evening at Camp Atterbury, the prisoners discussed what they had witnessed. The conversations were quiet, subdued, marked by reluctant recognition. These were not defeatists or cowards. They were professional soldiers, many of them decorated veterans. But they had seen evidence that could not be dismissed, ignored, or rationalized away. Friedrich Müller, the engineer, spent hours that night working calculations on borrowed paper. He estimated daily production at Gary Works, extrapolated to annual figures, multiplied by the number of American steel mills, compared to German output. Every calculation reached the same conclusion. America produced approximately 3 times as much steel as Germany. In some categories, the disparity was even greater. The implications for military production were straightforward. More steel meant more weapons, vehicles, ships, aircraft. More production capacity meant losses could be replaced, damage repaired, armies re-equipped. Industrial superiority translated directly into military advantage. Quality of individual weapons mattered less when facing 3 times as many enemy weapons. Tactical skill became irrelevant against overwhelming numerical superiority sustained indefinitely. One younger prisoner, barely 20 years old, captured at Kasserine Pass during his first month of combat, asked the question that haunted them all. If American industrial capacity was so overwhelming, why were they still fighting? Why didn't German leadership seek diplomatic solutions while Germany still held territory and maintained some bargaining position? Why continue a war that industrial mathematics had already decided? The older prisoners had no good answers. Ideology, hope for secret weapons, belief that willpower could overcome material disadvantage, unwillingness to accept defeat, fear of what defeat would bring. The reasons varied, but none changed the fundamental reality they had witnessed. America could produce more steel than Germany, sustain greater losses, maintain higher output, continue fighting longer. The war's outcome was written in production statistics as surely as if it were carved in the steel plates rolling off American mills. But Gary Works was just the beginning of the prisoners' industrial education. Over the following months, German POWs would be assigned to steel mills across the industrial Midwest, Pittsburgh's massive works along the Monongahela River, Cleveland's lakefront facilities, Detroit's automotive-turned-military production. Each facility revealed the same pattern: vast scale, high efficiency, sustained output, casual abundance, American industrial capacity that exceeded German understanding and German ability to match. Pittsburgh represented the symbolic heart of American steel production. The city's steel industry had grown with the nation's industrial expansion, fed by Pennsylvania coal, Great Lakes iron ore, and Ohio River transportation. By 1943, the Pittsburgh region contained more steel-making capacity than existed in all of Germany. The mills lining the rivers, Edgar Thomson in Braddock, Homestead Works, Duquesne Works, Jones and Laughlin on the south side, collectively represented industrial might that dwarfed German achievements. In November 1943, a group of 70 German prisoners from Camp Reynolds in Pennsylvania was assigned to work at the Homestead Steel Works. The facility had been a legendary site of American industrial conflict, where the 1892 Homestead strike had resulted in violent confrontation between workers and private security forces. Now it was producing armor plate for warships, steel for tanks and artillery, materials that would be used to destroy German forces on battlefields across Europe. Corporal Ernst Weber was among the prisoners assigned to Homestead. He was 28 years old, had worked in administrative logistics for the Wehrmacht, understood supply chains and production systems. His military specialty had been tracking material flow, ensuring units received necessary equipment and supplies. His organizational skills made him valuable for inventory management at the mill, checking incoming materials against delivery manifests, verifying quantities and specifications. The work provided Weber access to production records, shipping documents, material inventories, data that revealed the stunning scale of American output. In his first week at Homestead, Weber reviewed requisition forms for armor plate destined for naval shipyards. The monthly production of a single specialized product exceeded what he had seen allocated to entire German army groups. The numbers seemed wrong, impossible, yet they matched physical observation of material moving through the Börs facility. One document particularly captured Weber's attention. It was a production summary for October 1943, showing that Homestead Works had produced 78,000 tons of steel that month. Weber stared at the figure, checking it repeatedly. 78,000 tons, from one facility. In 1 month, the entire Ruhr Valley, Germany's primary industrial region, produced perhaps 300,000 tons monthly across all its mills. This one American facility was achieving over a quarter of total Ruhr output. The mathematics forced uncomfortable recognition. If Homestead Works was representative of American steel capacity, and if America had dozens of comparable facilities, then German production was simply outmatched. Quality of individual products became irrelevant against such quantitative superiority. Germany could build better tanks, superior aircraft, more sophisticated weapons, and still lose through simple attrition. But beyond raw production, numbers, what struck the German prisoners was American industrial organization, the efficiency of material flow, the systematic approach to maintenance, the continuous improvement of processes. American steel mills operated with methodical precision that Germans associated with military operations, not civilian industry. At Homestead, Weber observed how preventive maintenance systems minimized equipment downtime. Machinery was inspected on fixed schedules, parts replaced before failure, potential problems identified and corrected proactively. This contrasted sharply with German practice of reactive maintenance. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Fixing equipment after it broke, struggling to source replacement parts from an increasingly strained supply system. The Americans also used statistical quality control methods that Weber had never encountered. Random samples were tested to ensure production met specifications. When variations appeared, processes were adjusted immediately. This systematic approach caught problems early, maintaining consistent quality without requiring individual inspection of every piece. German quality control relied more heavily on craftsman skill and individual checking, effective but slower and more labor-intensive. Worker productivity at American mills revealed another crucial difference. In Germany, production increases came through longer shifts, more intensive labor, pushing workers and machines beyond normal capacity. At American mills, productivity came through better tools, improved processes, and systematic organization. Workers accomplished more, not through superhuman effort, but through superior equipment and methods. Weber witnessed this during a shift change at Homestead. As one crew departed and another arrived, there was no production gap, no downtime. The incoming workers were briefed on current status, any issues or adjustments needed, and operations continued seamlessly. Information transfer was systematic, documented, reliable. The organizational continuity meant the mill never lost productivity during transitions. Safety practices also differed fundamentally between American and German operations. American mills invested heavily in worker protection, guards on machinery, protective equipment, safety training, medical facilities on site. Accidents still occurred. Steel mills remained dangerous workplaces, but the Americans treated worker safety as essential to long-term productivity. Protecting human capital made economic sense, reducing injuries, maintaining experienced workforce, sustaining morale. German industry, especially under wartime pressures, often sacrificed worker safety for production targets. Protective equipment was minimal. Safety procedures were abbreviated. The assumption was that production must continue, regardless of cost in human terms. This short-sighted approach meant injuries, exhaustion, declining morale, ultimately reducing rather than enhancing output. In December 1943, another group of prisoners was sent to Jones and Laughlin Steel Corporation on Pittsburgh's south side. This facility produced a wide variety of steel products, from structural beams for construction to specialty steels for specific applications. The breadth of production capabilities impressed the prisoners as much as the volume. Lieutenant Otto Becker was assigned to work in the plant's laboratory where steel samples were tested to verify they met specifications. Becker had been a university student before the war, studying metallurgy in Munich. His technical background meant he could understand and appreciate the sophistication of American testing methods. What he learned transformed his understanding of industrial science. The laboratory used spectrographic analysis to determine exact chemical composition of steel samples. X-ray crystallography revealed internal structure. Tensile testing measured strength and ductility. The equipment was modern, well-maintained, used routinely for quality assurance. Most impressive was that this was standard practice, not special capability reserved for research or critical applications. Every batch of steel was tested systematically. Becker spent hours discussing technical matters with American metallurgists, communication aided by their shared scientific vocabulary and his improving English. The Americans were remarkably open about their methods, their processes, their technical approaches. They seemed unconcerned that an enemy prisoner might learn their industrial secrets. Becker gradually understood why. The Americans knew their advantage came not from secret techniques, but from scale, resources, systematic implementation. Even if Germany learned every American method, Germany lacked the material means to replicate American output. One American metallurgist, Dr. Harold Chen, explained to Becker that Jones and Laughlin alone employed more than 100 trained scientists and engineers focused on steel production improvements. They conducted ongoing research into better alloys, more efficient processes, enhanced quality control. This investment in continuous improvement gave American steel industry technological dynamism that Germany struggled to match. The prisoners working at Pittsburgh mills also observed something that surprised them: labor relations. Despite wartime restrictions on strikes, American steel workers maintained union representation, collective bargaining rights, grievance procedures. Workers could challenge management decisions, negotiate working conditions, participate in discussions about productivity improvements. This seemed chaotic compared to German authoritarian labor management, but it apparently worked. Worker buy-in, feeling that their concerns mattered, contributed to sustained high productivity. In January 1944, the perspective gained by German prisoners working in steel mills began spreading through POW camps across America. Letters passed between camps, though, censored and monitored, carried discussions of what prisoners had witnessed. The camp newspapers, published by prisoners and reviewed by American authorities, began featuring articles about American industry written by those who had observed it firsthand. At Camp Shelby in Mississippi, the prisoner newspaper Der Zaungast published an article by an anonymous author describing visits to American steel facilities. The article was carefully neutral in tone, presenting observations without explicit criticism of Germany or praise of America. But the facts spoke for themselves. American steel production exceeded German output by significant margins. The industrial capacity that supplied Allied forces was overwhelming and apparently inexhaustible. American intelligence officers monitoring prisoner attitudes noticed a shift occurring in early 1944. Initial denials that American production statistics could be accurate gave way to reluctant acceptance. Prisoners who had witnessed American mills firsthand spoke with authority about what they had seen. The evidence was too consistent, too well documented, too personally observed to dismiss as propaganda. The psychological impact of this industrial revelation varied among prisoners. Hardcore Nazis insisted that German secret weapons, superior tactics, and ideological determination would overcome material disadvantages. They argued that American abundance reflected weakness, that soft living made Americans unsuited for sustained warfare. These arguments sounded increasingly hollow to prisoners who had seen American workers sustaining steel production month after month while maintaining living standards German workers could barely imagine. Pragmatic prisoners, especially those with technical backgrounds, calculated and recalculated the mathematics of steel production. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. Germany could not win a war of attrition against opponents with 3 to 5 times greater industrial capacity. Tactical victories might be achieved, battles might be won, but the strategic outcome was determined by production statistics. Germany was fighting arithmetic itself, and arithmetic always won. By spring 1944, tens of thousands of German prisoners had worked in American industrial facilities. Steel mills, certainly, but also automotive plants converted to tank and aircraft production, shipyards building vessels at unprecedented rates, aircraft factories producing bombers and fighters by the thousands. Every industrial sector told the same story of overwhelming American capacity. The aggregate production figures that filtered through to prisoner camps, often from American newspapers or radio broadcasts, confirmed what individual observation had suggested. In 1943, the United States produced approximately 80 million tons of steel. Germany produced perhaps 30 million tons, despite controlling most of European industrial capacity. The Soviet Union, despite massive devastation and territorial losses, still managed 18 million tons. Britain added another 13 million. Combined Allied steel production exceeded 120 million tons compared to Germany's 30 million tons, a 4-to-1 disadvantage. These statistics translated directly into weapons production. American factories built approximately 85,000 aircraft in 1943, Germany produced 20,000. American shipyards launched 19 million tons of merchant shipping. German yards completed less than 1 million tons. American automotive production exceeded 600,000 trucks. German truck production was roughly 100,000. In every category, American output met or exceeded combined Axis production, often by substantial margins. Sergeant Hans Richter, who had witnessed Gary Works in October 1943, spent increasing time during early 1944 discussing these implications with fellow prisoners. His military training and staff experience let him translate industrial statistics into operational consequences. More steel meant more armor, more artillery, more equipment. American and British forces landing in France would be equipped with material superiority that made German defensive positions ultimately untenable regardless of tactical skill. The Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, confirmed Richter's analysis with crushing finality. Prisoners at camps across America listened to radio broadcasts describing the landing. The numbers reported were staggering: 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 troops in the first wave, followed by millions more. The logistical achievement of assembling such force, transporting it across the Atlantic, landing it on hostile shores, supplying it continuously, exceeded anything Germany had accomplished at peak strength. American guards at prison camps noted the visible deflation among German prisoners when news of D-Day reached them. Some prisoners had hoped for German counterattack success, secret weapons turning the tide, miraculous victories. The scale of the Allied landing made such hopes seem delusional. This was industrial warfare at civilizational scale. America, Britain, and Canada had mobilized resources Germany could never match. The outcome was foreordained. Friedrich Müller, the engineer from the Ruhr Valley, who had calculated Gary Works' production in October 1943, continued his mathematical analysis through early 1944. He collected production statistics from every available source: American newspapers, technical journals, trade publications. He cross-referenced figures from different sources, checking for consistency and accuracy. He compared American production to German output based on his own industrial experience and knowledge of Ruhr Valley capacity. His final analysis, completed in June 1944 and privately circulated among prisoners at Camp Atterbury, painted a picture of absolute German industrial inferiority, not marginal disadvantage that might be overcome through superior efficiency or better tactics. Fundamental, crushing, irrevocable disparity. America possessed industrial infrastructure that Germany had never developed and could not develop under wartime conditions. The resource base, the transportation networks, the electrical capacity, the organizational systems, all favored American production. Germany had lost the industrial war before the first shot was fired. What made the analysis particularly devastating was Müller's conclusion that German leadership must have known this. Intelligence services tracked Allied production. Military planners understood logistics requirements. Economic advisors calculated resource availability. The mathematical impossibility of German victory through military force was apparent to anyone with access to production, statistics, and basic arithmetic skills. Yet Germany had initiated and continued war against opponents with overwhelming industrial superiority. The summer of 1944 brought a steady stream of news confirming Allied industrial superiority, translating into military success. Soviet forces advanced across Eastern Europe, equipped with American trucks from Lend-Lease, American food, American raw materials supplementing Soviet industrial production. Allied air forces bombed Germany with growing intensity, waves of heavy bombers that German fighters could not stop because American factories produced aircraft faster than German pilots could shoot them down. In August 1944, Allied forces broke out from Normandy beachheads and swept across France. American armored divisions advanced hundreds of miles, supplied by massive logistics operations that delivered fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food to forward units faster than German forces could react. The Red Ball Express, an emergency trucking operation using dedicated convoy routes, moved 12,000 tons of supplies daily at peak capacity. This single American logistics operation exceeded the entire German supply capacity in Western Europe. Prisoners working at American facilities during summer 1944 witnessed production continuing at sustained high levels despite approaching Allied victory. There was no slowdown, no reduction in output, no sense that industrial mobilization could relax. American mills kept producing steel, factories kept building weapons, shipyards kept launching vessels. The production machine, once fully mobilized, operated with inexorable momentum. This too impressed the prisoners. German production had strained to achieve peak output, then declined as resources were exhausted, infrastructure was damaged by bombing, workers were conscripted for military service. German industry operated in crisis mode, lurching from one emergency to another. American industry operated with methodical efficiency. Sustained production maintained month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. By autumn 1944, most German prisoners who had witnessed American industrial facilities recognized that the war was lost. Some clung to hopes of negotiated settlement, some believed secret weapons might still change outcomes, some simply refused to accept inevitable defeat. But the majority, especially those with technical training or military experience, understood the mathematical reality. Germany had fought against overwhelming industrial superiority and lost through inexorable attrition. The final months of the war brought devastating confirmation of industrial disparity, translating into military collapse. German forces in the West retreated steadily despite tactical skill and desperate defensive fighting. Fuel shortages immobilized tank formations. Ammunition rationing limited artillery support. Replacement equipment never arrived to refill depleted units. The Wehrmacht was being ground down, not by lack of courage or tactical incompetence, but by industrial exhaustion. In December 1944, Germany launched the Ardennes Offensive, a massive counterattack in Belgium designed to split Allied forces and capture vital supply depots. Initial German advances achieved tactical surprise and operational success, but the offensive depended critically on capturing American fuel supplies, because Germany could not provide sufficient fuel through its own logistics. When American resistance prevented fuel depot capture, German armoured spearheads ran out of gas literally within sight of their objectives. The Ardennes offensive demonstrated in microcosm what prisoners had learned about industrial warfare. Tactical skill, operational planning, soldier courage, all mattered little when fuel tanks ran dry. Germany had gambled on capturing enemy supplies because German production could not sustain the offensive. America simply brought more fuel from its seemingly inexhaustible reserves, resupplied units within days, counterattacked with fresh forces. Industrial capacity decided the battle as surely as if armies had never fought. German prisoners in American camps heard news of the Ardennes offensive with mixed emotions. Pride in German tactical achievements, hope that perhaps the war was not yet lost, then crushing disappointment as American industrial power again demonstrated its decisive advantage. The offensive consumed Germany's last significant reserves of fuel, armour, and experienced troops for no strategic gain. It proved what prisoners working in American steel mills had learned months earlier. Germany could not overcome American industrial superiority through military action. May 1945 brought war's end in Europe. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8th. For German prisoners who had witnessed American industrial capacity firsthand, the outcome was inevitable, predictable, mathematically certain. They had seen the steel mills that supplied Allied armies. They had calculated the production disparities. They had understood months or years before final collapse that Germany could not win. The prisoners began repatriation in 1946, returning to a devastated Germany where cities lay in ruins, industry was destroyed, food was scarce, the future seemed bleak. Many carried with them knowledge of American industrial methods, American organizational approaches, American production systems. This knowledge would prove valuable in Germany's post-war reconstruction, when former enemies became allies and American techniques helped rebuild German industry. But in the immediate aftermath of surrender, What struck returning prisoners was the waste. The unnecessary prolongation of fighting after the outcome was determined. The continued sacrifice after industrial statistics made defeat inevitable. Sergeant Hans Richter, who had toured Gary Works and in October 1943, later reflected that he had known the war was lost in that first afternoon watching American steel production. Everything that happened afterward was futile resistance against mathematical certainty. The story of German prisoners working in American steel mills reveals profound truths about industrial warfare. In conflicts between modern industrial nations, production capacity determines outcomes more surely than battlefield tactics. Courage, skill, ideological fervor matter, but they cannot overcome crushing material disadvantage sustained over years. Factories matter more than fortifications. Logistics determines strategy. Arithmetic decides wars. American steel production in World War II represented industrial mobilization at unprecedented scale. At peak output, American mills produced approximately 90 million tons of steel annually, more than twice German production, even when Germany controlled most of European industrial capacity. This steel became tanks and ships and aircraft and artillery, weapons that overwhelmed German forces through sheer quantity, even when German equipment was technically superior. The prisoners who witnessed American steel mills saw this industrial reality firsthand. They calculated the production volumes, understood the implications, recognized the mathematical certainty of defeat. Some tried to warn military leadership, sending reports through official channels describing American capacity. These warnings were dismissed as defeatist propaganda, exaggeration by demoralized prisoners, impossible statistics that could not be accurate. But the statistics were accurate. The capacity was real. The production figures were verified through multiple independent sources. Germany was fighting opponents with 3 to 5 times its industrial capacity, and no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome such fundamental disparity. The war was decided not in dramatic battles, but in the methodical, sustained production of steel from mills like Gary Works, from facilities throughout the American industrial heartland. German prisoners returned home carrying this knowledge. They had seen American industrial might not as propaganda claim, but as physical reality. Furnaces producing steel continuously, mills operating 24 hours daily, material abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards, but sustained Allied military operations indefinitely. They had witnessed the economic engine that powered Allied victory, understood its overwhelming superiority, and recognized that German defeat was inevitable from the moment America fully mobilized its industrial capacity. The steel mills stood as monuments to industrial power translated into military might, not weapons themselves, but the means of producing weapons in quantities that determined outcomes. The German prisoners who worked in those mills learned a hard lesson about modern warfare. In industrial conflicts, the nation with greater production capacity will prevail through attrition, regardless of battlefield performance. Tactics yield to logistics, strategy bows to arithmetic. Wars are won in factories before they are decided on battlefields. Looking back from decades later, the German prisoners who witnessed American steel production in 1943 and 1944 could say with certainty that they had seen the instrument of their nation's defeat. Not a particular weapon or a brilliant general or a decisive battle, but the vast, methodical, unstoppable capacity of American industry to produce steel. Steel that became tanks and ships and aircraft. Steel that supplied armies across oceans. Steel that maintained Allied forces even when Germany destroyed equipment and inflicted casualties, because American mills simply produced more steel, more weapons, more material than Germany could ever hope to destroy. The lesson resonates beyond World War II. Industrial capacity remains fundamental to national power. Economic strength underpins military capability. Production determines what nations can sustain during extended conflicts. The German prisoners who calculated steel production statistics in 1943 understood truths that remain valid decades later. In modern warfare between industrial powers, factories matter as much as fortresses, perhaps more. the capacity to produce, to sustain losses, to continue fighting when others are exhausted. These determine outcomes. American steel production in World War II demonstrated industrial mobilization at its apex, 90 million tons annually. Enough steel to build armies, navies, air forces that overwhelmed opponents through material superiority. The German prisoners who witnessed this capacity understood immediately and intuitively what it meant. They had seen the future, and it was decided, not through any single battle or campaign, but through the cumulative, relentless, mathematically inevitable triumph of industrial superiority. They returned to Germany carrying that knowledge. The war had been lost not when Berlin fell or when Hitler died, but when American factories mobilized to full capacity and began producing steel at volumes Germany could never match. The outcome was written in production statistics, in the tons of steel emerging from Gary Works and Pittsburgh mills and facilities across America's industrial heartland, written in numbers that told the story of inevitable defeat more clearly than any battlefield report ever could. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.